Okay, everyone, it's great to be here. And as John mentioned, we just met very recently, and Michael actually reached out to us when he found our Sustainability in the Arts Festival. So just a little bit of background, I suppose. I'm the program leader for a music degree in Southeast Technological University, but I also lead the Sustainability in the Arts Festival and a few other little things, the generative AI project, and lots of intersections between these things. So our context, I think all of us in the sort of higher education and indeed all the education sector are very much aware of the new strategies that are coming out, over the last few years, where we're to embed sustainability in our curriculum, and we're to, so there's lots of these words, and we have to create a culture of sustainability. So we were sort of standing back saying, okay, but what does that actually mean? How do we make this happen? And also within the strategy, there's that more macro type of perspective about how we're going to create global citizens. Our students are going to go out there and they're going to change the world, which they do, and that's absolutely wonderful. So in relation to sustainability, we just felt that we actually need to give them the tools, the knowledge, the information to be able to do that. CASE is it's a teaching and learning group I set up a few years ago in the university. Creative approaches to student engagement. Student engagement is something I'm very, very passionate about, because I just believe that we need to, I suppose, facilitate this investment in their own learning, and rather than that old lecture module or model, I should say, where you just stand there and you're preaching at students, this sort of collaborative approach where they're really actively involved is what I espouse, and that's what CASE was all about. And we had done lots of things involving technology, like, e-portfolios, infographics, visual learning, vlogging, things like that. So we thought sustainability would work really quite well, in that type of context to, bring it to our students. So we wanted it to be accessible, and we wanted them to be able to sort of, I suppose, find things that resonated with them about sustainability. And that's why we arrived on the festival approach then. It was about a broad type of dissemination of the learning and something that would be enjoyable for them and that they could really get their teeth into. So that's what we did there. So we ran our first festival last year. Our funding, I put this in here because I just wanted to show how sustainability is actually one of the key thematic areas for both of these different funding bodies. So the SATL funding, that's like for the entire education sector in the Republic, and then the EdTutor funding is for the technological university sector, but sustainability is the key theme for both. So I chanced my arm throwing in funding applications and got it, and there we go. Actually on the first year we also got, I think it was a bit cheeky of me to do this, but I put in for student entrepreneurship funding for the festival and got it. So like you were sort of stretching the boundaries of it, but look, we'll take it if they're going to give us some money. So this is how we started off with a multidisciplinary team. So my area is obviously the music, and then I collaborated with colleagues in, the people who shared the same spaces with me. So in music, what I did, my process was that, I sat with my music research students. These guys were first years, and I was saying, okay, so what has sustainability got to do with music? And they're like, nothing. It's about climate. That's it. So we went to our new friend, ChatGPT, and I use it a lot in the classroom, so I pulled it up on the board and we said, what has sustainability got to do with music? And all of a sudden, these things started coming out, about sustainable festivals, about producing music sustainably, music production things. It was about gender inequality in music industry, quality education, there was lots of things. So the students could just sit there and you can see their eyes just starting to light up and, oh yeah, actually, that resonates with me. This is something I can do. So in terms of their assessment, then they were able to actually pick research topics based on things that resonated with them. So I'll show you on the next slide. These are some images for our pilot festival. We threw it out there in a very short space of time. I think it was about a 6-week type of a run into it. But we said, look, we have some money. Let's just go and do this. We're not giving the money back. So we put it out there and we let them all find their own angle. So you can see there, for instance, one of our guys, he made a cigar box guitar. So he just got recycled stuff, made his own guitar, and he was happy then to do up a little research project on that, stand at the festival at his stall with his cigar box guitar, take questions. And we had the culinary guys. What they did was they decided to focus on the broad bean, because apparently this is a really good sustainable food. So they grew it from the start, and they had these glass type of cases so you could trace the growing process. And then they developed recipes around the broad bean, and then they did cooking demos for the festival and tasters and all sorts of things. We had music, we had visual art, we had research, sustainability shots, we had crafts, we had all sorts of stuff. And, you know, it was, to call it a festival, it was a morning and it was in one of our buildings. That was it. You know, but we put it out there and we said, okay, we're going to do this and we're going to learn, you know. So then what happened after that is basically everybody started sort of saying, oh, I'd love to be involved in that, you know, and it grew and grew. So we ended up expanding it into a couple of days across several different campuses. And we did a really big feedback session with the students who were involved in the first festival. And the thing that came across strongly is that they wanted something that was meaningful to them. So they didn't want the big broad things where we have to change the whole world, we have to eliminate all the plastic in the world. They wanted, what can I do on an individual basis? So they wanted to bring it back to themselves. And we also had feedback from our art, design and music guys. They were like, we want it in our building. Just because there's more students on a different campus, you know, we want it in our space. So we did. We brought it to our space, and we were sort of, you know, well into the planning and had our brochure nearly finished when the Carlow and Wexford guys came along and said, oh, we want to do something as well. So we ended up expanding it out. And we also, in the first year, we had some outreach, I will call it. What we did was we had a competition for secondary school students where, with their languages and things, they could produce posters, digital posters around sustainability and do different languages and what it meant to them. And we had a little competition and we displayed them visually on, you know, the boards, digital posters. This year, my Year 3 music pedagogy students went out to school and they built a composition from environmental sounds, body percussion, and the students, they built instruments and things like that, and they made this lovely arch form composition, very simple. They did a rainstorm with, you know, body percussion and clicking and clapping and things, and thunder from jumping up and down, and they created this amazing graphic score, which I'll show you in a second. And the other schools there, they built their little dioramas. It was called My Sustainable World, and they were just brilliant. They had little models, and we had them all on display, you know, like farms with solar panels made out of cardboard, or, you know, things where they had little sardine tins all stuck together to make this underwater ecosystem thing. They were just brilliant. And so we brought the schools in as well, you know, and this, I suppose, is in terms of impact. And we had competitions around that. We also had an international perspective. The Georgia Southern University popped up. They had an MOU with our university, and they just said, well, look, we're working on coastal sustainability in Savannah, and you share a lot of, you know, things with us, and they have lots of farming backgrounds, you know, for the students. So they sort of really wanted to be involved, and they did some amazing posters around runoff and sustainable farming. But the creativity was wonderful because, for instance, one of them did a project on the botanical gardens in Georgia, and they built a board game. And it had a map of the botanical gardens and the figures you would encounter if you go on a tour of it, and made it into a game. And then the others were talking about corn syrup and the dangers of that. So they did this origami workshop with all the school kids, you know, where they built, or they made ears of corn, and then they had statistics and things on each one. And they all just got really sort of involved in it. And the disciplines obviously expanded out. And there's John up there, look. John came, and this was our connection, our first introduction to the SDSN, and we're absolutely delighted actually to meet with the guys and look forward to more collaborations as we go forward. sorry, the formatting on that shifted a little bit now, but not to worry. You can see these are some of the things that are going on. Incidentally, the visual arts student that did the installation, they're the first one. She's at the moment installing down in Sark, and they have the immersive experience tomorrow there in the afternoon, and you can see some of it there with the lights. And these are all reclaimed objects from the sea, and then our students took video footage of the Copper Coast and all sorts of things like that, and they composed music to go with it. So it's just this fully immersive experience. We have our sunflower collage there. So the sunflowers of Van Gogh is being built out of recycled bits and pieces that people brought along, culinary students. There's our school. We had all these cardboard sculptures, and there's the graphic scores over in the corner there with one of our students. So we're actually going to mount that on the corridor now. The school kids basically did the artwork, and then one of our visual arts students put it together into this. So the festival, I suppose, just really, I suppose it just blossomed so much. This is just a little quote from our president, Veronica. So she was just talking about how significant the festival, you know, was to the sort of community, and beyond that to the region, and so on. So then, moving on from that, these are some quotes. I don't know if you can actually even read them, but the students were just talking about how sustainability and their vision of it broadened far beyond, you know, what their initial thoughts were, and how they can just bring it to their own level, I suppose, and the small steps, as the first student is saying there. And then the collaborative idea really underpinned so much of what we did. So for instance, we had culinary students who came up with a recipe. They were talking about red lentils this year. So then the graphic design students took that, made them into these recipe cards. The language students translated them into foreign languages. Photography students took the thing. So we had all these collaborations that wouldn't normally happen, you know, and they came together and made some just really, really beautiful stuff. And the same thing with our students down in Sark at the moment. They're working with Janine, a fourth-year visual arts student. So she's hanging her stuff, and then our music students, they're, you know, setting up all of the sort of spatial type of soundscape that's going on around that. So lots and lots of really, really exciting things. And I think something also about the last quote was from a colleague of mine in graphic design, and what he was saying was about the buzz on the campus, how everybody was just so into it. There was music, there was visuals, there was everything, you know. And in our building, we started on the bottom floor. We had all these cardboard sculptures, which were amazing. We had music going on, and then we wound up to the first floor where it was all the graphic design installations. Then we wound up to the second floor where it was all the visual art ones, and it culminated in the immersive experience up on the top floor. So I think people just loved the fact that the place was alive and everyone was having conversations. And actually the pins, the SDG pins, they were like just hot property. I had ordered 100 of them, and then everyone was like, where can I get one? You know, where can I get these? And I had everybody from porters to students to our VPs coming up saying, you know, they all wanted to be part of our secret society. So we were actually devising a secret handshake and things like that, you know, for people who are in the know. But I suppose my point about that is that everyone really came together. It was such a community effort, and you know, there was happiness, there was lots of stimulating conversations, and loads of new connections as well, you know, so that was lovely. Moving forward, yeah, we have a newly appointed associate VP for sustainability, and hopefully, you know, he's going to be good for us in, you know, having that sort of collaborative approach. I put in to expand the festival team, and that's because the Sustainability Festival, as John and Dave and possibly Michael knows, consumed my entire life, because it was something that was small, and then it just kept getting bigger, and it actually ended up taking over my life. And even now, you know, we have a university in Canada who want to bring all their students, be involved. The Georgia Southern guys were coming every year. We'll be here for however many weeks. There's all different disciplines. And so there's an appetite for this. You know, there really is an appetite, you know, to get involved and how to, you know, have these creative approaches to getting your students involved. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to spread it across the full week, because the Carlow and Wexford campus, people came late. We ended up doubling up, so there was parallel type of things happening, and then everyone couldn't support everyone and go to everything. So, you know, it was, I think the next time we'll expand it out across the week. Further partnerships, yes, that seems to be happening sort of naturally. And we're also talking about just expanding beyond the university campuses and moving into the community a little bit more, like into our library, or, you know, the city and county council spaces, the local galleries and things, just to bring our message out there a bit further. You know, instead of just bringing people into us, we're going to go out there as well. And then obviously the research bit has to come after that. So that's me. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Hazel. And I would just like to put in a plug for the immersive experience tomorrow that her students will be performing. And it really is, it was captivating and it was very moving. And Hazel didn't mention, but it was the VP of Sustainability's first day on the job, so he had an immersive experience himself. And it was a really cracking good buzz there in that whole, the 2 days there. So thank you. And so the next group is Kevin, Vicenza, and Peter, who are connected through the Londonderry Theatre Group. And they're going to be talking to us about Artitude, which I'm really curious to hear about how that's described.
Okay. My name's Kevin. I'm sure my colleagues will introduce themselves in a second. We just thought it might be nice to at least let you know what the Artitude project is, so that's a little descriptor. And those are the partners at the bottom. So we've done a pilot for about 18 months. We're about to embark on a 3-year program and initiative based in Derry, Londonderry, and that region. And then we just have a little video from the pilot, which will give you a sense.
Hi everyone, I'm Vicenza, and I'm an artist and a researcher and an activist, and I've been involved over the last few years with the Artitude project, thanks to Kevin and Peter and Paula Larkin as well. So I mainly work with communities that are resisting mining and extractivism, and there's a really great group called Save Our Sperrins that are resisting gold mining in the Sperrin Mountains, maybe some of you know. But I've been doing a creative research project with them over the last 5 years. And through the Artitude project, we've been able to collaborate on that, which has been really nice. So I just wanted to share 3 short examples of collaborations that we've had. The first one was I've been doing a photography project with them called Photo Voice, which is about people kind of defining the lands that they live in for themselves and connecting to place, rather than it being defined from the outside, which is often what happens with extractive industries. So we did an exhibition in the Playhouse in Derry, which was great. We've also done counter-mapping workshops up in the Sperrins, where we've had groups from Derry come out and learn about the resistance movement there, and we've done this creative participatory map in there. And then finally, we have a collaboration called Making Relatives, which is a collaboration between water protectors here in Ireland and in Turtle Island, so mainly with the Lakota and Ojibwe nations. And they've been coming over the last few years. And it was just last June, actually, we did a river walk of the River Foyle from the source to the mouth. And then we ended at the Playhouse Artitude Festival, and the youth theatre group that came over did their play called We Do It for the Water, which is based on their resistance to oil pipelines over in North America. So that was really a great event and very powerful. So yeah, I'll leave it there and chat later. Thanks.
Before Peter says something about his involvement, the other perspective, I suppose, because we've had Vicenza and lots of other artists involved, and Vicenza working very much at the place where people are already active on the ground. And so one of the things that's interesting is that I'm from an arts institution, so I work at the Playhouse. And so there's a kind of a journey for institutions as well as to how we find ourselves getting into this space. So from our perspective, the first thing that we were thinking, well, first of all, there's a need. And most arts institutions have a sense of need because they're serving communities. Ours is a community of place in the one sense. It's also a community of interest, or interests, because there's lots of different communities that aren't just defined by geography. Then it was mentioned earlier by Tanya, I think communities of practice, art forms in our case in particular, theatre or music theatre. And then the other one is communities of purpose, where people gather around purposeful things. And so at the Playhouse, we often talk about the reason why we're here mainly is because we think it's important for people to make meaning together, and to do that creatively, peacefully, and with hope. So when we were looking at this, we recognized, we need to do something. We have a voice, we could maybe contribute here. So question number one is, how are we going to contribute? Question number two, I think, was what change? Because this is about change, I think, this session. So what change is actually needed? And I suppose another question is, what can we distinctively bring to this challenge? And we realized that a lot of our practice, of course, has been unbelievably beautifully. I thought I might have to come to this, like often happens when the arts is in the room in different spaces, to argue why the arts should be involved in this, or what it brings. But that's not been the case today. It's been so eloquently talked about as to what the value of the arts is in this space, and it's kind of clearly believed in this room, so that's really interesting. But we recognized also as another aspect of our practice, we're in a post-conflict, I know it's kind of a little bit old-fashioned now these days, being in a post-conflict society, but in the end, we have a long-standing tradition of arts and peacemaking, using the arts in trauma situations and making peace and bringing people of difference together. And we realized quite quickly that practice, that learning that's very distinctive across Northern Ireland, really applies when you're thinking about our part within nature and how we are, in some ways, we're suffering a trauma, we're also enacting trauma on the planet, and also that this is actually a conflict situation, kind of. So that there's some great learning that we can bring. So that was one of the distinctive things we could bring. And we also realized we couldn't do it on our own, so we needed partners. And we knew that a collaborative and creative approach was needed. So that's kind of our journey. And then we began to connect with wonderful people here and the other partners involved. So that's kind of how we got here, I thought. So that's an interesting perspective, perhaps, just looking at it from an institutional space. Peter.
Yes, if I was to tell the story of how the connections, I'm a partner with the School of Law. I teach at the School of Law, but I'm a partner with the Artitude project, and was involved in some of the earliest conversations which gave rise to the proposal. But I was just going to embarrass Kevin by saying that if I was to give you a genealogy of the origins of the project, it would go back to a pub in Derry a few years before you even became associated with the the Playhouse. So I've been involved with sustainability now, both as a policy and research I suppose agent within the parliaments in Dublin and Belfast. I have a deep interest in the pedagogical approaches that get to the heart of the questions that we do not want to ask. I think most of us are well paid sometimes for asking questions that fall short. Because for me, the ecological, the socio-ecological crises are deep provocations to ask deeply disturbing, disruptive, and uncomfortable questions about our disposition, our ways of being in the world, ontological, epistemological, cultural questions. We had a lovely webinar in another project that Kevin's involved in with the Wellbeing Economy Alliance for the Island of Ireland. Tim Jackson, Professor Tim Jackson, who does great work with the Centre for Understanding Sustainable Prosperity. And he cautioned us when we talked, we had a webinar about art and the new economy. And he says, art is the project. It's not about using art. It's not about art as a vehicle. Art and culture are the project. I want to share a couple of quotations just to emphasize the role of art. And I think hope is an important word that Kevin's just used. This is a quote by Rob Hopkins, who is the founder of the Transition Towns movement. Longing. Longing is a vast, aching, yearning word. I've always felt that unless we are able to cultivate a deep and visceral longing for a low-carbon future, we have no chance of ever creating it. It's the question that obsesses me. How to cultivate a deep cultural longing for a post-carbon, more just, more equal world. I don't have all the answers, but I know that it's the $100 million question. I also know that, for starters, we can only do it by harnessing art, poetry, music, design, dance, storytelling, and creativity. And there's something about the essence of the artistic disposition, or the role of the trickster, in getting us to come at our own lives, our own attention, our own disposition, in fresh ways, in disruptive ways, to get at those little secret strategies of denial that we all carry around. So another influence on my work is the Zen philosophical tradition. Gary Snyder, the famous Zen poet, wrote that the poetic mind, the mind of the creative artist, is a realm of wildness. Thus the eco-syllogism, the preservation of the world depends on the wild. The poetic mind is wild. Therefore, the preservation of the world depends on the poetic mind. Thus, Artitude.
I have no idea. Well, I mean, we could, there may be questions about it. I think there might have been John somewhere who was hoping to chat. So I suppose we've just offered you three perspectives, given you a little bit of a flavour of what the project's about. Maybe that's all you need, you know.
I'll just say that one thing that while Kevin and the Playhouse has been involved in Derry, London Derry, within the context of reconciliation, and there's been very powerful testimonial work around the conflict, the experience of conflict. And one of the ways in which I see Artitude is building a new layer of a movement, building on a legacy of struggle and transformation, but beginning to include the landscape, include our relationships to nature, including relational forms of economy, bringing that into the peace-building story. And in relation to Vincenza's work in particular, Derry was the site of field day, translations. This movement is also a moment, a new moment of decolonization, decolonizing the social imaginaries that are imposed in waves and waves and waves with historical colonialism, but the attention economy that captivates, captures, places us in a sensorial cage. That's the new frontier of the struggle as well. So those are layers of activity that I envisage exploring as part of Artitude. I know Kevin doesn't always share that language, but it's
Well, there's no, that's good to have a little tension. You may have had a question, sorry.
A very, very quick, simple question. Hi, Peter. I see you again. Fascinating account. The word Artitude, where does that come from? Is it meant to evoke attitude? Is it meant to be certitude? Is it meant to be rectitude? I mean, I'm just curious. What was your starting off point for it? I'm guessing it's probably attitude through art, is it?
Yeah, it's a transformation, I suppose. And in one sense, it's a sense of think about change the way you think, change the way you act, change the way you are, change the way you be. But probably that's the wrong order. And it's just a play on those words. And it's short. And it's a pain in the neck in word because it keeps respelling it to attitude. So, so it is completely to do with that. But I think it'd be good if, did you have anything you might want to finally say, Vincenzo? My only question before you do that, building on Peter's, that's very honest of you, Peter, it's true, sometimes we struggle together in that language, is just the question around growth, which I think's come up a little bit. And so what occurs to me through something like this and a lot of the other projects is what is it we are choosing to grow? I know there is a thing that growth or traditional growth in the economic sense is something that's challenging because our planet has limitations. But our thought is, or maybe it's only my thought, but my thought is around what is it actually we like to grow? And we're talking about a lot of growth here, but mostly it's growth of imagination, growth of connectivity, growth of sustainability, growth of different kinds of things. So that seems like a fascinating question just to leave. Anyway, Virginia.
Yeah, just to build on what Peter said as well, my work's very much about thinking about different ways of relating to each other and to the more than human world, and I think that's something that's very central to Artitude as well. You know, we need different ways of doing things and different ways of being in the world if we're going to face the crises that we're facing. So yeah, for me, that's what it's all about, and that's a decolonial approach, I guess.
Realizing it's been a long day, I think we're just going to kind of keep things moving along here. But the next group, again, really taking that action idea and what can we do. And the initiative of SDSN Ireland is about trying to bring leveraging universities from an all-island perspective to try and accelerate progress on the SDGs in the Paris Accord. So really trying to move along in all spheres and arts as well. And we have a panel with 3 members of our leadership team of SDSN Ireland who are also on the executive committee, which is the working group. And we have Ambassador David Donoghue, we have Sara Lynch from here at Queen's University Belfast, and Maria Kirrane from down at UCC Cork. And just to mention that Michael Alcorn is also a member of the Leadership Council and the Executive Committee. So, thank you for agreeing to be here today. And we're just going to kind of try and have a conversation about this. And I think for a starting place, it's just, you know, thinking about maybe some of the ideas that have happened here, because I don't think any of us are primarily an artist, although we may have some artistic hobbies on the side. But maybe things that you may have learned today and picked up on, but really getting at what's the, what would you think yourselves as being on the executive committee of where SDSN Ireland should go and what it should aspire to be? Maybe in a couple of minutes. And that's a big one.
Okay. Yeah, I'll start on, because my brain is just all over the place after today. There's been so many interesting presentations, and it's just been such a fantastic event, so thank you, Michael. One of the things that really resonated with me, and first of all, I just find it so sad in a way that we've separated art and science, because to me it's almost the same thing. You can't be an artist without having some kind of scientific mind, and vice versa. and what resonated with me is so many people talking about feeling like imposters, or like we don't know enough about things. And I think that's what really holds us back from working together so much. And the SDGs are all about collaboration and coming together. And I have certainly found within my role, so I'm the head of sustainability and climate action in UCC. Really, we were saying as well that you need to be able to experiment to do sustainability, but also you need to be able to get comfortable with the limits to your knowledge, because I feel like, aside from the great David Donoghue, there is no such person as an expert in sustainability. And in my experience in my job, the times that I've really had breakthroughs and had really amazing projects come alive is when I've been able to sit with someone and say, I've absolutely no idea what you do. You've absolutely no idea what I do. But let's, sit down, let's talk, let's come around to some kind of shared solution to this problem that we have. And I'm not sure if I'm making sense there, but and I think that that's what SDSN Ireland can do as well. It's so much about bringing the right people together around a table, having conversations and figuring out, okay, what are each of our areas of expertise, and how can we bring those together to do something that actually matters and makes a difference?
My reflections on today, my eyes have been totally open to just the wealth of activity that's really happening in this area that I'll hands up just didn't know was there. So it's really shone a light, and for me on that collaboration of where sustainable and the arts really meet. And when Michael said we're going to do a sustainability festival around the arts, I've worked in Queen's for 14 years. I've worked in multidisciplinary engineering consultancies, and whilst I may have had a bit of arts in my youth, I've kind of moved away from it. So I was a bit like, okay, Michael, I'm going to go with this, because you're really, everything we've done so far where I'm working with you has worked, but I'm not quite sure, what you're really talking about here. But it's been absolutely amazing. And what's, we called over to the Naughton Gallery earlier. We had kids in there from Holy Rosary Primary School. 78 kids were in learning about plastic. They were up in the gallery looking at Ingrid's fantastic work, and she was talking to them and engaging with them about plastic, and they were happy, and they were really, really engaged. And from a university perspective, sometimes we're seen as this ivory tower, where, we're only about very serious, research, and we don't really want to talk to people or engage with people about it. Getting those kids through that door and seeing those happy faces brings me so much joy, because they are the future. They are, they will live with the world that we are, creating now. So for me, it's been fantastic to see what we can do. We've started talking about here today, and hopefully we can keep those conversations going. And certainly when we set up the UN SDSN, it was in Ireland. It was all about trying to reach out beyond the usual suspects that universities will talk to and start those conversations. And my NGO background way back when I started and I graduated was all about participation and bringing everybody into the room, and looking at things from different perspectives, and working with sticky notes and drawing pictures and thinking about things, and not in the way we strictly now talk about things in a boardroom or in a traditional kind of way of putting together and coming up with solutions. So yeah, hopefully that will allow us to kind of move more towards that way of thinking, and that's certainly what we want to be doing with UN SDSN.
Thanks very much. And even in the short time I've been here, I've been bowled over by what I've heard, just as I was bowled over in Waterford about a week ago. I suppose I approach it a bit from the global perspective, because I had some involvement with the framing of the SDGs and of the wider agreements that went with them. So in a way, the SDGs are about creativity. When and Maria hit the nail on the head a moment ago, that they're really intended to be about people, about groups, about projects coming together, looking for solutions to complex problems. Solutions which involve often collaboration, mutual support, using an idea which you've heard of from somebody else, picking it up and working on it yourself. I mean, the word creativity mightn't appear very often in the SDGs agreement, and mea culpa, but ultimately that's what we were trying to achieve. That's what the energy behind the Sustainable Development Goals was meant to be about. Thinking outside the box, getting away from standard kind of silo-based ways of working, looking for more interdisciplinary collaborative approaches. So, even, I mean, what this wonderful initiative by Michael and Sara and others has inspired in me is a feeling of guilt that I should have worked harder to reflect some of this thinking in the declaration which went with the goals. In the goals themselves and the targets, obviously they're dealing with specific issues around health and education and so on. But there was a declaration which went with the whole thing, and we intended that to be a kind of hold-all for the wider cross-cutting themes. The closest we got to the subject matter for Reach 2024 was a paragraph which talked about, and I'm just paraphrasing, the importance of culture as an enabler of sustainable development. Now that, to be honest, came about because we were really trying to pinpoint the importance of indigenous cultures around the world. I mean, bear in mind what I was trying to do was capture kind of a global consensus. So it was taken for granted that indigenous peoples, indigenous cultures all over the world should play a part in sustainable development. So that, frankly, was the origin of the couple of sentences which I drafted about the importance of culture and civilizations. But I now think, in retrospect, that we should have really made an effort to reflect the importance of art as a means of helping people to reach a deeper understanding of the world, of nature in particular, of their environment, of communities, that art in a way unlocks a lot of human and even environmental potential, and we didn't really capture it properly in the document which went with the SDGs. But I have taken it on board as I won't be involved, but when we get around to negotiating a new set of goals, which will be, I think, in about 3-4 years' time, I really do think that there is a strong case to be made for articulating much more clearly what art can and even must do. So my thanks to Michael and his colleagues for this fantastic initiative, and to Hazel for last week in Waterford. I mean, this is really, like the others, for me, it's absolutely eye-opening. And I really wish that we had focused on it a bit more directly when we were doing the actual negotiations.
So, David, you actually answered the next two questions I had in my mind. So that you know, but so that was good to know. And that in 2030, as we move beyond that perhaps culture can be more of a part of the 2030 agenda, which is that wider document that I would encourage everybody to have a look at, because it really drives home the need of being, the multi-stakeholder engagement, all forms of society working together and collaborating together and trying to advance these goals in a unified way. And it really offers a transdisciplinary language is something that I find is also steeped in the 2030 agenda that gives us a way to communicate across all these, these disciplines. So, and David was the one that was holding the pen during the drafting of the 2030 agenda. So we have a couple more minutes here. So I'm kind of curious from, especially for our two sustainability leads, is how you personally see the role of universities spilling over all that we learn and not just being silos and not just being the ivory towers, but how do we really connect into community and pass on this information? And I think art's very important, what's happening here, what Hazel kind of mentioned about how we can move, the next iteration would have a wider reach into the community. But I'm just wondering, and Sara looks ready to go there, yeah.
I think it's really important that it's not seen as us, as universities or academics swooping in to kind of tell people how to live their lives and how to do things better. It needs to be very much a co-design process. It needs, we've got a wonderful project called QCAP here at Queen's, where our range of academics are working alongside the community in the markets to develop a better kind of strategy for that area to help it develop socially, economically, and environmentally. And they're undertaking research there, and that research will help inform how they can do that better. But it's all very much on a very even playing field. And it's all being led by what the community want to get out of it. It's not, predetermined as to what the end will look like. That it's very much being shaped by them. And I think that's a model that we can use, in other areas. We talk about the Living Lab as well, and using our kind of, instead of in the local community, instead of looking for, seeking those big, massive research grants, which are very important for keeping the lights on, but looking to see actually where can you use your expertise and work in partnership with the local community, and, do active research that's actually going to help those communities. Things like our street space project, where our architecture students are actually going out there and helping the community redesign their spaces to be more sustainable, and healthier spaces, so more greenery. How would they like those to look? And then working in partnership with the local, with our Department for Communities, to see how they can actually then make that happen. I think it's about using that expertise and partnership with the community to get solutions that are going to, are what the community actually want, rather than something that, is predetermined and kind of defined by so-called experts.
So I just got flashed the 1 minute warning.
All right. I've been thinking about this a lot recently, and it's similar to what Sara said. We're a little bit full of ourselves in universities, and we think we've done all these amazing things, and we create this amazing knowledge, and our students go on to do these great jobs. But if you look at those top 100 polluting companies, I guarantee you that all of the C-suite executives have university degrees. So you could say that we've been a huge part of the problem as well. So we have to get real about being more interdisciplinary. The UN have said we have all the technical solutions for climate in particular. We need to figure out how to make them work in real life, and be accepted in real life. We have to get serious about education. We have to support our young people to enable them to make the changes that need to be made, and to help them to understand how they can act on climate. And then we need to also be educating the people that are currently in decision-making roles, so that they actually make the decisions that need to be made. I guess as universities, we do have a privilege that we have funding that's relatively secure. We have the ability to experiment, and we are allowed to make mistakes. So the idea of the Living Lab and trying things out and then sharing that knowledge more widely is definitely what I see SDSN as really being able to contribute here.
Okay, well, thank you to the three of you. And now we'd like for you to stay here, and our other, 4 individuals, so we're gonna need a couple more chairs just to have a final roundtable here conversation. For starters, the thing that I realized today is seeing so much that revolved, the thinking of the artists had an ecological frame of reference quite often I saw, which actually made me feel good in a part of this. But what I'm wondering is how do we bring and bridge the gaps between the STEM and get that A in there and make it STEAM, and that there is a collaborative space? What do you see as the sort of the obstacles to that, the barriers, the opportunities, and maybe the sensitivities we need to have for working more collaboratively together? I don't know if anybody wants to go first on that.
Working together principles can be useful. So I suppose some things, the obstacle, I suppose, is we don't actually have an accepted practice of how to do it well. And we have to intentionally build that, much like anything else. So it kind of seems a weird thing to say, we want to do it, but in a way, in the arts, we're forced into it. And Ali referred to it earlier. You have small companies who want to do things that have a higher aspiration than they could possibly have resource for. So in the end, they collaborate with other people and other organizations, and this is true of individual artists, I'm sure too, Vincenzo would say the same. So we have to work out how to work with people. And then that, so if I'm at the Playhouse and it's a reasonable sized organization, let's say I want to partner with Queen's. First of all, the biggest challenge for me is not to get swallowed by Queen's, because it's such a big institution and I'm that size institution. And then let's say I want to involve Vincenzo and a few other artists, think of it from their perspective. And the thing is, it's easy to say we're collaborating, and often people do it, and we certainly do it in funding applications, but there isn't an established enough practice. And particularly here in Northern Ireland, I think, we really have to learn that. And in some ways, we're making the road as we go. So, like in the Playhouse, we talk about assume positive intent. See, some of these are a bit relational, if you think about it. Listen first to understand. Seek to build, seek to find common ground. Respect difference. And build reliable and trustworthy relationships. And then the other thing to say about it is it takes time. So if you go back up into the systemic level, really, and it's been mentioned here several times today, is that the systems that we operate, from the governance to the economic systems to the social systems, are not oriented to enable us to be creative and be collaborative, which would be natural if you look at it from the ecological perspective, because that's really how things work. So we're always at intention with the systems. So if you want to do something that's interesting, different, collaborative, creative, you've got a battle, which is completely the wrong frame if you think about it. You can't be collaborative and battle at the same time. So it's fundamentally, we have to learn a new way of being, which we have the capacity to do, but what we're not doing is changing the system we're in. And this is also important too. I'm sorry, I'll get off my soapbox now in a second. But this is also important because in the end, if we want to make real change, and people want to be a part of that, but they can't be a part of that if they have to worry about certain ways of doing things. If we don't change the enabling environment sufficiently, none of this will be able to grow. And I suppose if you take the ecological thing, the seeds that we're planting are just going to be lost. They're not going to be cultivated. They're not going to be enabled to grow. They're not going to be tended to enough because we're not spending enough time doing it. We're not learning how to be collaborative. And we're always in a space of, almost trauma, certainly fear or fight or flight. That really was a little, I wasn't expecting to say all that, but so.
I'm probably not even going to answer your question, but we found that the Georgia Southern guys who came from science backgrounds and health, all of this, they came over to us and they were like, we love hanging out with you guys, because they're like the people we hang out with, like they're just really boring stuff and they're whatever. You're so much fun, so the artists, the creatives, all of that sort of stuff. If you can get them into that space, then they start coming up with ideas as to, actually, do you know what? We can get into your gang if we're like, we could do this or we could do that. And they do start to come up with ideas because they're sort of getting into the whole sort of the buzz of the community and of what you're at. So if you can even get them in there to have a little insight and get them excited about it, I find that, what I found particularly this year, they're coming to us saying, I have a great idea. I mean, I was telling Ian earlier on, we had this computer guy who emailed me. He was like, I'd love to be part of your festival. And he's like, we like take apart old computers and, we recycle bits and we make them into these type of artifacts and we come up with different ideas, So, and that was just because, here's the festival, here's what's going on. And he was like, okay, I've nothing to do with art or creatives or anything like that, but here's what I could do, So I think give them a platform, bring them into your community a little bit, and maybe the inspiration for, getting involved in some way will come from them.
No, you actually did very, very much. And I think, too, coming from more of a science background, there's all the reductionism, there's all the absolute truthism, there's all these isms of, the way things are supposed to be done. And it's liberating. It's liberating to be around people that aren't constrained by linear thought process, that are free to move. And even the concept of time, being thought of time is not necessarily a linear process, or it can be, it can be worked around. So these are interesting. And David, I'm curious here.
Thanks, John. Just a couple of quick points. It's funny, at the international level where I operated, art and science would be seen as absolutely irreconcilable. Yet, listening to Maria and others, I can see that's completely wrong. But I know that we would have had no problem at all getting international acceptance that science is the way to go in the SDGs, because people feel safe with science. Everything has to be empirical, evidence, science-based. But if you were to introduce the idea of art, individualism, creativity, at a global level, that would be viewed with great suspicion. So that's why when I said earlier, I was regretting that we didn't make a bigger effort to bring in the importance of art or an artistic response. The truth is that I wouldn't have got away with it because we had to get 193 countries to agree, so they wouldn't have agreed. But that's really my first observation, and my sympathies are entirely with Maria, because I have, I can see actually that we're in many ways talking about the same thing. The second point is there was one of the quotes which Hazel put up, I think it was the second student, the one who said that he's impatient with kind of huge global goals, that in fact he prefers to work out what he can do, what difference he can make in his own life. I relate very, very much to that. And the truth is that that's the way it's going to go. Yes, we have these SDGs, which are huge global goals, and we will probably have another set very like the present set. But the theme nowadays is localization of the SDGs, as you know, John. And indeed everybody here on the panel, we can only really make progress at the most local and individual level. People changing their lifestyles, literally changing their philosophy of life. And that's where I think art actually has a big role to play. And it's not that I've always had this insight. I've only had it since focusing on what Hazel did last week in Waterford and what Michael and others are doing now. That art really makes it possible to look at the environment, look at human activity differently. It gives you you have a more empathetic response. It calls you to stand back. It also enables you to see the linkages perhaps between art in this part of the world and art in South Africa and art. I mean, in a way, it's a universal language with many different expressions. So for me, in a way, yeah, I'm just really reacting to a number of stimuli this afternoon.
Anybody in the audience have a question?
David, with you being on the panel, I'm very curious about, I heard you speak before about how you managed to put Leave No One Behind and Farthest Behind first as a summary of all of the SDGs and all of the direction of travel. And I suppose listening to people today, we heard a man here in the audience earlier ask about the sustainability of practice of the farthest behind first, artists, those that are on the margins or outside of all of these institutions. And I'm just curious about, I suppose, it seems to me that in governmental circles, there's a comfort with speaking about Leave No One Behind, but there seems to be a huge discomfort with speaking about farthest behind first. And I just wondered for the panel to respond to that in terms of what would that mean in terms of being in service to the communities and the global communities that are farthest behind in this, in everything that we've just been talking about today.
Maybe I'd just say two sentences on that, because since I'm responsible for the words to begin with, unfortunately we had to compromise by saying we will try to reach the furthest behind first. It wasn't an absolute commitment by 193 governments, but you bring up a very, very interesting point. We intended that language to refer to the most marginalized and vulnerable groups, but as in, let's say, the elderly, children, people with disabilities, that set of vulnerabilities. But in fact, it's entirely legitimate to say that artists are actually isolated, marginalized, under-resourced, etc. So although it wasn't, frankly, in our minds when we wrote the phrase, at the same time, it's an entirely legitimate way of reading it, that really worldwide there should be far greater support for artists who almost by definition have to be on the margins of society. I think it's a fascinating point. I don't have an, I mean, I can't see it immediately changing governmental minds, though it should, but it is fascinating.
Anybody else?
I would just say one thing about that actually, and about the furthest behind first, you know, and just to, something struck me earlier as well in the conversation about grief and the fact that really what we're experiencing, you know, it's not the end of the world, we're experiencing change, but I just think it's worth people bearing in mind that change is hard, and that change also can be very unfair and unequal. And we need to be very, very careful about that when we're thinking about the furthest behind.
Okay, I was told with a stern face we have time for one more question.
Oh, well, I'll try to make it too all-inclusive. Universities are institutions that are open to corporate capture in the sense that the more successful they are, the more attractive they are to corporations to gain their power, gain their influence. And what you're talking about in Waterford or whatever seems to be you're running as fast as you can to keep ahead of that. How do you see that developing within this context?
Well, do you know, I was thinking about that. You know, when comes the point where we have to sort of say no to people and say, well, actually, you know, we're stretching the sort of boundaries here quite a lot. You know, and I keep having that thing about arts in my head, because it was what sort of made us stand out was the fact that it was sustainability in the arts festival, you know, because there's loads and loads of sustainability initiatives, and we wanted to keep that type of identity. So I don't really have an answer to your question, but what I'm saying is that it is actually in my mind, and even the people that are contacting saying, we'd love to be part of this, we'd love to be part of this, and then I'm saying, has nothing to do with the arts, but then again, you don't want to like not be inclusive, you know, because if people are making an effort and they do want to engage with it, it's about nearly finding a space to sort of fit them in terms of, you know, you're talking about, you know, corporations and big, you know, generally, well, I'm finding they're not interested in us really, you know, as you know, arts practitioners so much, you know, but that's just my experience. I'm sure other people may have other ones, but I don't know. I think we are going to have to be careful about the pace, because we do want to maintain quality as well. And it's not just a matter of, okay, let's do everything, you know, and then it just becomes something that's actually not as good in terms of the quality or the messaging that we're getting across. And maybe that it just all becomes a bit blurred. You know what I mean? So I think, yeah, to have concerns around that are actually very valid. So thank you.
Alrighty, well, thank you to the panelists for being here, sharing your practices and your thoughts and ideas with us. It's much appreciated. And thanks to everybody here. I think Michael has some closing remarks for us and where we go to next.
Can I just begin by saying a massive thank you to everybody who's taken part today. I kind of looked at this morning and thought this is going to be a bit of a marathon. But actually, I think the variety has just meant it's been a real sort of rich tapestry of ideas. It's going to take a few days to digest some of the things we've heard. Amazing food for thought. I've been really inspired by, I think everybody has brought a really important perspective to this area. And even before we got to this point, we had already agreed we're doing this again next year. And we want to make this a kind of call to, a kind of clarion call to people to come next year with more practice, more examples of work. We want to use the spaces and places that we have on campus to really make this come alive. So today was really taking the lid off this, looking at all the really good things that are happening right across the island, and how can we then take this and develop this idea further forward. But we're not finished yet. This evening, we have our film screenings, 6:20. Catherine's got free tickets. I think you already know this by now. And that promises to be really good. There's going to be a short discussion afterwards with some of our colleagues talking about the impact of rising sea levels. And then tomorrow is a very carefree event with lots of things for you to go and experience and enjoy. Ingrid had mentioned that there's art in the AM tour tomorrow at 10 a.m. in the gallery, so please do join Ingrid for that. We've organised this so it's a little bit of a safari. It moves from that into an event that Dan Shipsides, who did the workshop yesterday, and Amanda and Ruth Hunter, who works in our Centre for Public Health. And there's a Connecting With as Nature discussion then. And then we segue up to the Sonic Arts Research Centre. Karen Power, who was a PhD student here, has been collecting field recordings from all over the world. These are incredible sounds, and you will not get a better opportunity or a better venue to hear these. And then we have our closing event, which is right after that, with a number of works, again using endangered sounds, probably not an expression you've thought about, but very much so, real experimental pieces. These pieces have been recorded in what's called ambisonic, just as a technique. You will not get another chance to hear things like this with this level of fidelity other than in the Sonic Arts Research Centre. So that's something not to be missed. And also in that same concert is the work of Hazel students in Waterford. They've been practicing this afternoon. Hopefully they've been having a good time. Okay. And that's, there's a kind of music performance with those students, plus visuals, plus soundtrack. And I'm definitely not going to forget Jules this time, because Jules will be finishing off that event along with Ben, who's here. I'm really looking forward to that. You've really whet our appetite with what you've talked about today, and the sounds are amazing, Ben, so looking forward to it. So once again, we've got a little break now, which you'll all be glad of, but just to say a massive thank you to everybody who has spoken today. And Ian, anybody wants to go and see the exhibition in the Computer Science Building, you can follow Ian. He's here waiting for you. He may sort of drag you along. But yes, if anybody would like to see those presentations, that's now. And once again, just thanks to all of you for coming along, listening, and to our friends in Moonlighting who do so much work for us at Queen's. They're always fantastic. So thanks to all of them and to all of you. And we'll see you all later in the QFT. It's going to be good. Thank you.